Hello, class. In this lecture, we'll look at bibliology, polarization, and Johannine literature. So let's get started. We got 15 slides, so it's a little bit longer than some of the others. Let's look at polarization, light and darkness in the Gospel of John. We see here in John's Gospel, verse 5 of chapter 1, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. The verb katalambano, which is translated comprehend, may also be translated overcome. John may have purposely been ambiguous here. The verse may read as an echo of creation. The darkness did not overcome the light. The verse also may be understood in terms of salvation. Jesus, as the light of the world, came into the world, but the world did not understand him or his message. We look in chapter 3 of the Gospel, verses 19 through 21. John contrasts Jesus as the light and evildoers as being in darkness. The coming of the light, that is Jesus, into the world has precipitated judgment. The judgment consists of a person's response to the light, that is Jesus. A person has two alternatives: to come to the light, that is to believe in Jesus, or to shrink back into darkness and incur condemnation, that is to reject Jesus. John speaks of those who reject the light, Jesus, as being already condemned because they do not believe. Other passages where John repeats the light and darkness dualism in his gospel. Jesus said, here we look at the first bullet underneath that, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. The next bullet, we see Jesus said, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is still day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world, says Jesus. And the next bullet, Jesus said, a little while longer, the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he's going. While you have light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. After Judas Iscariot departed the upper room, John writes, and it was night. John 13:30. The imagery is clear. Judas rejected the light, that is Jesus, cast his lot with the powers of darkness, departed into the darkness, and was swallowed up by it. So here you see the light and dark imagery that's in John's gospel here in chapter 13. Let's look at the epistles next. John states that the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining, 1 John 2:8. Following Jesus' ascension, the light of the world continues to shine. The darkness did not succeed in overcoming it, yet the darkness has not yet fully passed away in the present age. John writes that this metaphorical statement, God is light and in him is no darkness at all, 1 John 1:5. Light and darkness are mutually exclusive and cannot coexist. Nothing that has anything to do with darkness can have anything to do with God. Thus, John implies that the person who claims to have fellowship with God and yet walks in the darkness has no relationship with God at all, 1 John 1:6. Not talking about salvation, he's talking about fellowship in this epistle. John uses the light and darkness dualism to describe the state of an individual. The person who is in the darkness until now, 1 John 2:9, who is in darkness and walks in darkness, 1 John 2:11, is not a genuine believer in Christ. On the other hand, the person who obeys Jesus' command to love one another by loving his neighbor abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. 1 John 2:10. Let's look in the dualism of light and darkness in the book of Revelation. Referring to the New Jerusalem, John writes that the city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. So in the prophecy of the New Jerusalem, we see that Jesus, the Lamb, will be the light, and God will be the light there. No need of sun or moon. The light that shone out of the darkness at creation, Genesis 1:3, will shine forth once more when the last things are fulfilled, John 21:23, and John alludes to Isaiah 60, verses 19 through 20. Now let's look at a different dualism, polarization in John's writings, heaven and earth, above and below. Referring to his heavenly origin and mission, Jesus said, "The bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives light to the world." John's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 33. It occurs again in 6:38 in relation to Jesus' earthly mission and reiterated in John 6:50 through 51. Jesus contrasts heaven and earth. Here in John 6:62, he says, "What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before?" Contrasts between the world of humanity and the world above are found also in John 8:23, 42, John 9:39, and John 12:46. The contrast between heaven and earth in the farewell discourse of John's Gospel. By implication, we see in John 14:2, 28, and John 16:5 and 10. By Jesus explicitly in John 16:28. Jesus proclaimed in the interview with Pilate, he says, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not from here." In sum, one notices that much of the heaven/earth imagery is vertical imagery, revolving around the use of terms such as above and below, descending and ascending, and earth as opposed to heaven. Clearly, John is writing in terms of opposites or contrasts. Now we look at the polarization of flesh and spirit in John literature. Jesus explained to Nicodemus, "That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the spirit is spirit." John 3:6. Flesh is limited and cannot attain spiritual life with its own abilities. It is necessary for a person to be born from above, that is, to undergo a spiritual birth. Jesus said, "It is the spirit who gives life, the flesh profits nothing." To understand Jesus' teaching only in human terms is to miss the point. Jesus said, "The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." Now we see polarization of belief and unbelief in Johannine literature. Jesus said to Nicodemus, "I have told you earthly things. If I had told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" John 3:12. Jesus presents belief and unbelief in mutually exclusive terms. He says, "He who believes in him," that is himself, Jesus, "is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already." John 3:18. John writes in John 3:36, "He who believes in the Son," that is Jesus, the Son of God, "has everlasting life. And he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him." There is no middle ground. Jesus declared that I am the bread of life. "He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet do not believe." John noted the Jewish people who still refused to believe even after all the miraculous signs Jesus had worked among them. John 12:37. John attributed this unbelief to spiritual blindness brought on by God as judgment. Yet in contrast to this unbelief, many among the rulers believed in Jesus. John 12:42. The next polarization is love and hate. In John's Gospel, we'll look at first the outward signs of genuine love for Jesus. Well, the disciples' love for one another and obedience to Jesus' commands. So that would be love for Jesus. The world is hatred of Christ, though, and hatred of his disciples. The world hated Jesus first, John 15:18. The world hates the disciples because they are not of the world. Jesus predicted the persecutions for his followers because of the world's hatred for them, in John 16:1-4. Then we see love and hate in the Johannine epistles. Obedience to Christ's commands, especially the command to love one another, provides a ground for assurance to the believer. In contrast, he who says, "I know him," and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. The one who claims to be in the light yet hates his brother is still in the darkness, and such a person walks in darkness. So we see here in 1 John, the first epistle, John describing the love-hate contrast. We see darkness has blinded such a person, and this spiritual blindness is comparable to Jesus' opponents in the Gospel of John. On the other hand, the one who loves his brother lives in the light. And that's John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 21. And then we look at John contrasts the hatred of Cain for Abel and of Christ's opponents with Christ himself, who laid down his life for us. John contrasts love for the family of God with the absence of love. And 1 John 4:7-12. Love for the family of God demonstrates one is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love God does not know God, for God is love. The commandment for believers to love one another is mentioned again in 2 John 5-6, where it is again related to obedience. Love for fellow believers is also in view in 3 John 5-8, where service to the brothers is commended. And the sources of the material for the polarization in Johannine theology was adapted from H. Hall Harris, a theology of John's writings in A Biblical Theology of the New Testament, pages 203-212. And that concludes this lecture.